Okay, welcome. I am delighted to see people here. I know we're having another upsurge in COVID in our community, so masks are definitely encouraged, but it's really nice to be back in person with some of our events. Backed by popular demand, because we heard what an incredible team they were at South by Southwest, is Esther Sternberg and Rocky, as he likes to be called, Crocker. I want to tell you a little bit about the Aging Initiative. I'm Kathy Insel. I'm actually the interim dean at the College of Nursing right now, but I'm also the director of the University of Arizona Health Sciences Strategic Initiative in Innovations in Healthy Aging. What a privilege this has been to be focused on such a positive thing in aging and to be working with the team that we have. So I don't know if you're aware, but the percentage of older adults is changing nationally. Our population is becoming what they call rectangularized, where we have a larger percentage of people who are 65 and older, largely because of the baby boomers from World War II, but also because we're surviving longer. Our largest growing age group is 85 and older. So nationally, we see an increase in the percentage or the proportion of people 65 and older at 34%. In Arizona, we see over 48% increase in people with who are 65 and older because of our wonderful climate and our welcoming environment. So our primary aim when we set off to do this initiative was to influence the critical factors that affect the health of an aging population. University of Arizona is very well poised to focus attention on aging and how we can positively impact aging. So we got a group together. Luckily for me, Esther Sternberg was involved from the very beginning. Anissa was involved from the very beginning. And we created a model where we were trying to do 4 different things, 4 prongs. One was outreach and engagement. So that's part of the lecture series. We're trying to bring older adults in to our community, and we want to be out in the community. We want to facilitate our communications and be a partner with you. We also wanted to focus attention on research by providing seed funding for some of our colleagues here at the university that would be in different departments with multi or interprofessional collaborations looking at aging, problems in aging. We also wanted to create an age-friendly university through physical adaptations. For example, it's hard sometimes to park around the university or to make your way around the university. So we have a focus on trying to improve the services that we have for you. And we also wanted to be a resource for you. And alternatively, for you to be a resource to those of us who are working in this field in the university. So as I've said before, my colleagues in this are Mindy Fain and Esther Sternberg and the members of the working team who are amazing. That we have a unique and synergistic collaboration in this team. As you look at the screen, you'll see that Esther Sternberg is on the left and that Mindy Fain is on the right. Without the persistent and consistent efforts of these amazing women, the initiative would not have taken flight. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Michael Dake, the Senior Vice President of the University of Arizona Health Sciences. He co-created this initiative. It was really with his energy and positivity that we were able to take flight. I also want to call your attention to Aging and Social Justice, which will be the next lecture in February 22nd. This one will be presented by Dr. Laura Harward. She is a faculty in the College of Law. So as you see, the other thing I love about this initiative is just across the campus interactions and collaborations. She's a professor of practice at the James E. Rogers College of Law and bioethics faculty at the College of Medicine in Phoenix. She's a retired associate professor of philosophy at the University of Arizona. This lecture series is for you, our community members. You can learn more about what we have in store by visiting the events section of our website. Please participate in the website. Tell us also, give us feedback. Tell us what's not working or what you don't see that you'd like to see. Now, I have the absolute pleasure of telling you a little bit more about Dr. Esther Sternberg. She is an internationally recognized mind, body, science, and design and health pioneer. Dr. Esther Sternberg's research explores health impacts and outcomes from molecules to the built and natural environment. Her discoveries inform integrative medicine and optimize well-being across the age span through lifestyle and design. She is the Associate Director for Research in the Innovations in Healthy Aging, Research Director, Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, the Inaugural Andrew Weil Chair for Research in Integrative Medicine, Professor of Medicine, Psychology, Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, and founding director of the University of Arizona Institute on Place, Wellbeing, and Performance. She has received the U.S. federal government's highest awards and was recognized by the National Library of Medicine as one of the women physicians who changed the face of medicine. She has authored over 235 scholarly articles and 2 popular science for the lay public books, including one of my favorites, Healing Spaces, which helped ignite the 21st century design and health movement. With her, and I'm very thrilled today to have met you in person, Rocky, is Robert Rocky Crocker, Dr. Robert Rocky Crocker. He is the 2007 Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, that's AWCIM, Fellowship graduate who joined AWCIM in 2012 as the Director of Strategic Clinical Planning and Implementation. He was involved in the development of the center's integrative health lifestyle program and the integrative health and wellness coaching program, and in the development of the integrative self-care app, My Wellness Coach. He serves as a consultant, helping individuals and organizations develop integrative strategies and centers. Prior to coming to our center, Dr. Crocker was the Chief Medical Officer of American Specialty Health, and prior to that was the National Medical Director for WellPoint Health Networks. After having practiced family medicine in Mississippi for 11 years, Dr. Crocker has served as a health consultant, providing oversight of previous humanitarian relief efforts in Central Asia, and more recently has worked with Aboriginal communities in Australia. I am so delighted to have these auspicious folks with us this evening. So please come and take your chairs. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy Insel, for that great introduction. And it really is a thrill to be here. And thank you all for coming out in person. It's really frightening, scary, stressful that we've gone through the last two and a half, now 3 years. And we're just beginning to get our feet wet, getting back in person. And then here we are, we're masked, and a lot of people couldn't come. So to those of you online, welcome. To those of you here, welcome. So I'm going to start with a question to all of you. How many of you have been stressed in the last couple of years? So some people are putting 2 hands. We've all been stressed. Many of us are burned out. In the next 40 minutes or so, Dr. Crocker and I, Rocky, are going to give you some pointers of what you can do to de-stress your environment and hopefully de-stress your lives a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Rocky with a question. How can you tell us what is integrative medicine and how people can use integrative medicine to help de-stress themselves?
Certainly. Integrative medicine is healing-oriented medicine that takes account of the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, and includes all areas of lifestyle. So my journey to integrative medicine was not exactly an easy journey or a straightforward journey. I'm one of those people that has to learn the hard way, or at least that's what my mother told me. And I was thinking about this, that it's almost been 44 years ago since I graduated from medical school. There were still dinosaurs roaming the earth, and the earth's crust was still cooling, so you had to be careful. But throughout the 4 years of medical school and 3 years of family medicine residency, no one ever had a conversation with me about self-care. Zero, zip, nada. And I had a 30-minute lecture on nutrition, which basically said, Eli Lilly makes these diets that you can use with people with diabetes. Just read those and use those. So that's my background with that. So I left ready to change the world. Growing up at that time, there were no restrictions on how many hours a resident could work or would be required to work. So it definitely was a hazing environment. So I carried that over into a practice, and I went into a community that had no physician, a small community in Mississippi, and started a family medicine program. Things happen. You know, I ended up also teaching, being a clinical instructor at a local family medicine residency program, the medical director for a chemical dependency unit, the chief of staff at a local hospital. And then I ended up starting a nonprofit organization that was doing humanitarian relief and consulting in the early 90s in what was formerly Soviet Central Asia. All good things. And I had a partner join me at one point who left. And for the last year and a half that I was in active practice, literally was working 110 hours a week. So I realized this is a great story and I'm not going to live to tell it. So clearly the problem was the job. So after much soul searching, I ended up leaving active medical practice and going to work at the dark underbelly of medicine with a managed care company. And at that point in time, they had this thing called weekends that you actually didn't have to work on those weekends. And over the next 2 years, I ended up taking a national position that grew to a national medical director. And again, 11 years later, I find myself literally my last year at the job, I flew 290,000 domestic air miles. I was getting on an airplane at midnight to fly across the country at least once a week. I was never home, about 18 hours every 3 weeks. I didn't see my family. And I find myself right in the throes of burnout all over again. Anybody's definition of burnout, I can check all the boxes with that. But I had this startling, disturbing revelation that the problem wasn't the job. The problem was within me. I never learned how to find balance. I never learned how to do the things I needed to do. So I ended up walking away from my job, taking 11 months to really get back and ask these questions. What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Things I asked when I was a teenager, right? But here I am again, having to ask these same questions. And during that period of time, I did something radical. I would go to the store each day. I would buy fresh fruits and vegetables. I learned how to cook. I was spending time each day out of doors, sitting on the earth. I began introducing some practices and some meditation. I was really doing more things, actually spending time with my family, getting to know them again. I almost had to introduce myself at this point, and connecting with friends, and then really getting grounded in some spiritual practices. And so those are the things basically that led me to begin to have healing. And then I heard about this strange program in Arizona that was the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine Fellowship, a 2-year fellowship. So I thought this was a perfect time to immerse in that. And so over this period of time, I experienced personal transformation. And happy to say, even though I felt imbalance coming at times, I recognize it. And for 17 years so far, I failed to to fall back into that. But this is all due to changes within me, but it ends up having changes in lifestyle. So Esther, that's a bit of my story. How did you get into the field of mind-body science?
Well, I was at the National Institutes of Health before I came here to the University of Arizona. I was there for 26 years as a senior scientist and section chief. And I was studying the connection between the brain and the immune system. And it all started because of a single patient whom I had seen when I was a fellow and training as a rheumatologist and arthritis doc back in Montreal at McGill. And that patient had developed an autoimmune scarring, inflammatory disease. He looked like he'd been in third-degree burns. He couldn't extend his arms. He was in excruciating pain. And he had been given an experimental drug for epilepsy. He had a fatal form of epilepsy. And the drug was meant to increase brain serotonin. It's not any of your SSRIs, so don't worry about it. But that was such an obvious example to me of doing something to the brain and triggering an immune disease that I spent the rest of my career trying to figure out how the brain and the immune system talk to each other. And this was back when the dinosaurs were walking around. So it was more than 40 years ago, 40 years ago. And at that time, the scientific community did not believe that the brain and the immune system could talk to each other, let alone that if there was an impairment in that communication, that you'd have disease. But I pursued that question, and I went on to the National Institutes of Health, discovered studying rats that the brain's stress center is important in susceptibility to inflammatory disease. Like arthritis, and there really is a connection between the brain and the immune system. So it became the science of the mind-body connection. But I didn't fully understand the connection between stress and illness and belief and wellness until I went through a similar experience to what Rocky went through, my own stress in my life, many stresses, including that my mother was dying of breast cancer. I was a long distance caregiver, and I developed inflammatory arthritis. What an irony, you know? But just like Rocky explained in his life, I had an experience that changed my life, that gave me an aha moment to understand that there are things that I can do to get better. And that was, I serendipitously went to Greece with neighbors. I had moved into a new house in Washington, D.C., and my neighbors asked if I was a writer. I said, well, I don't know. Why do you ask? I didn't think of myself as a writer at the time. I was just writing my first book. And they said, we've always wanted a writer to stay at our cottage in Crete. So I said, I'm a writer. And I went with them to Lentas, this tiny village on the south coast of Crete. And I healed. And it was not a miraculous cure, but I healed. I was swimming in the ocean every day. I was eating a healthy Mediterranean diet. I was surrounded by the grandmothers of the village who all shared their polyponai arthritis. Those of you who know Greek will understand. I see somebody's nodding, so you must be Greek. So there was social support. I began to climb the hill above the village where there was the ruins of a temple to Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. And next to on top of the ruins, there was an ancient little Greek chapel that had all the icons and the candles. And I would sit there for hours, not realizing that hours were going by. And I'd look at the beautiful blue of the Mediterranean and the fuchsia bougainvillea against the white stucco buildings. And I didn't know I was meditating. I thought I was just sitting there listening to the sheep and the goats, but I was meditating and I didn't know that. So in retrospect, I didn't know that I was engaging in the 7 core areas of integrative health. When I got back to Washington, D.C., I was supposed to go into an early arthritis protocol at the National Institutes of Health. I'd had knee biopsies. I was supposed to get a liver biopsy. And when I saw my doctor, he said, "You don't need to do this. You're better." And so I'm going to ask Rocky to tell us about the 7 core areas of integrative health so you can all engage in them to make yourself better.
Absolutely. So when we teach this, we talk about these areas as nutrition, sleep, resilience, environment, movement, relationships, and spirituality. Kind of, I go clockwise with these things, but these things are all connected to one another. They don't stand on their own. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So nutrition, first of all, when I was growing up, I was told you are what you eat. And so I had this fear of broccoli because I did not want to become broccoli. And that haunts me to this day, but I've worked through that with a support group. But I later learned about food as medicine, and the idea about what we eat does affect our health in general. And in this country and in many parts of the world, basically, we have a highly processed diet, much fast foods in that diet. And we've learned that type of a diet actually is pro-inflammatory. It increases the level of inflammation in your body. And as a result of that, inflammatory conditions like Esther described, having inflammatory arthritis, it also increases the likelihood of heart disease, of other inflammatory conditions, of development of diabetes, and has even been associated with some increased risk for certain types of cancer. The converse of that is also true. So by bringing in changes in the diet, and Esther described a Mediterranean diet of fresh fruits and vegetables and fish and not fried foods and not highly processed foods, that's actually anti-inflammatory, and it begins to downregulate the inflammatory response in the body, which results in improvements in these areas. And Esther described a very dramatic thing that was externally validated by her physician, that within a short period of time, she was significantly improved by dietary intervention. So I think this is very important to realize. Sleep is one of those things too that we don't think a lot about. I mean, I'm going through my training, I didn't know what it was to not be sleep deprived. And the idea of having good sleep hygiene and realizing that sleep is the time of the day when our body has a chance to do repairs. It's not being distracted by us juggling 12 things at the same time. And it also is a time that we consolidate our memories. So the importance of sleep is that it does improve our overall health, our sense of well-being, our energy level, and our ability to concentrate. So even small changes in sleep hygiene can make a big change in the way that we feel and in our overall health. Resilience. Esther asked how many people had been stressed. The last 2.5 years, I've not met anyone whose resilience wasn't significantly taxed. And here we are, over 2.5 years later, and are still dealing with pieces of this. And so resilience is the way in which we are able to withstand and handle the stresses that we go under. The importance of making changes there is when we have these stress hormones raging in our body. Again, this is another thing that can be pro-inflammatory. And so the idea with resilience of beginning to do things like mindfulness or journaling or introducing daily practices or sharing with people, but something that really feels like it's life-giving and nurturing to you, beginning to incorporate more of that in your diet helps us to be more resilient, which helps us in the face of everything that's going on in the world externally for us. Environment, and I'm not going to get into talking about environmental pesticides and chemicals. I really want to talk about environment in the context of nature, of connecting with nature. There's so much healing there that I'd experienced, Esther's experience. It's very well known that connect with nature, to ground in nature, to be out in nature is just healing. It improves our sense of well-being. It actually helps us to be able to withstand stress in and of itself. movement is important, and this is regardless of age. I'm using the word movement as opposed to exercise. In my mind, movement used to be exercise. So I had to have a regimen that this many days a week, I was going to do this many things. And I felt guilty and I beat myself up if I didn't do those things. What I'm talking about here is moving more, being less sedentary, and small changes in your mobility and decreases in being sedentary have a major effect. It improves sleep. It improves our ability to concentrate, our sense of well-being. It actually can help us to stabilize and have a more healthy weight. It also can help with risk of heart disease, with blood sugar levels, and with blood pressure levels. So regardless of our age, and all of these things contribute to healthy aging, right? I remember this afternoon, but my father-in-law had a plaque on his wall that said, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. So I'm not saying that that's what that you should promote, but at any age, at any time, it's important to really do the things that we can control to make improvements here. Relationships. This has also been, particularly early in the pandemic, there was so much isolation and sense of hopelessness and depression because we are social creatures. Even me, I'm actually quite shy. Maybe hard to believe, but I am, and socially awkward at times. But even for me, I need that social connection with family and with friends, and it's important both to share good things, but it's to share the challenges. And so even during the midst and the throes of the worst parts of the pandemic, tried to regularly connect virtually because that's what I had. And that was an important, that really seemed to make a difference. And this connection also helps us to have that more of a sense of not being alone in the world, having to deal with things and not being the only ones experiencing these things. And then spirituality. And spirituality, I don't mean necessarily organized religion, even though for some of you that may be the form that it takes. But to me, this is really the connection with the sense of something bigger than ourselves, whether that be without ourselves or within ourselves. And the idea that that connection, and whether that be through contemplation or being involved in ceremony or whatever that may be, those things actually help us to better withstand the stresses that we go through and provide us with a sense of hope. So those are, when I think about the 7 core areas, some of the things that we talk about. Now, Esther, you started out as a rheumatologist and a basic scientist studying rats. So how did you get from there to studying the impact of the built environment on health and well-being? And also, can you share some of what you found in your studies?
Well, I was at NIH at the time, and the then director of research for the U.S. General Services Administration. That's the agency of the federal government that builds and operates all non-military federal buildings, your libraries, your courthouses, your embassies around the world, and so on, for over 1 million civilian office workers. The then director of research, Kevin Campshire, came to me and as a sister agency at NIH and said, would you help me measure the impact of the office spaces that we're building and designing and operating on the health, well-being, and ultimately productivity of our workforce? And we began a study in a federal building in Denver, where it was being retrofitted. And if you can see on the left-hand side, the old space had high wall cubicles, was poorly lit, had poor airflow, high mechanical noise. It was musty. It didn't have any daylight. And the retrofitted same building had open office design. It was airy, views to the mountains, good airflow, low mechanical noise. It was lots of sunlight and circadian light. And to my surprise, and I honestly don't know why I was surprised, when we measured the stress response in the people in the old space and the new space, using wearable devices, where heart rate variability. So we were measuring their stress and relaxation response objectively. We measured salivary cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol. we found that the people in the new space were significantly less stressed than the people in the old space. Well, duh. I mean, I should have known that. But Kevin Kampshire needed that data to convince the powers that be to design better buildings for health. And the interesting thing about that data is that the increased stress response in the people in the old space carried through to their home when they were out after work, at home, at night, while they were asleep. So you take your workspace home with you at night. Now, when I came to the University of Arizona, we did a follow-on study now with more state-of-the-art. The first study was in the early 2000s, published in 2006. We did a follow-on study starting in 2013, where we studied 4 federal buildings and 272 federal office workers, again, using state-of-the-art wearable devices and big data analytics to link health and stress and relaxation responses, movement, sleep quality, to up to 11 different environmental attributes. And that gave us a lot of information about what it is about these spaces that can either stress or calm. So what we can do is go through those same 7 areas, core areas of integrative health, and see how it is that you can design your workspaces or your homes to help you engage in those 7 core areas of integrative health. Because one thing we've learned from the pandemic is you cannot control all these stresses around you. None of us can. There's no way. We are totally stressed by everything that's going on in the world. But you can control your immediate environment. That's something you can do that will chip away at that stress that is predisposing to more severe viral infections, lower take rate of vaccine, predisposing to prolonged wound healing, growth of certain cancers, and chromosomal aging. We're talking at an aging event here. When you're chronically stressed, your chromosomes can look 10 to 17 years older than your biological age. At this stage in my life, I don't want my chromosomes to look 17 years older than I am. So, but you can't control everything, but you can control your environment. So one thing we learned from this GSA study is that there are elements of the environment that can help reduce stress. One of them, as Rocky mentioned, is biophilia, is green, is plants, is being in nature. There are many ways that you can bring the outdoors in, or you can go outdoors and be in nature if you can't bring the outdoors in. Put some plants around your workspace or in your home, or go to a local park. This is an example here on the right-hand side of the Sonoran Desert Garden at the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, with recycled water from rainwater and the HVAC system. And it's in what used to be a parking lot. In the summer, you could fry an egg on that parking lot blacktop. But there are always people in this wonderful, cool, calming green space that reduces stress. Movement is also important. You can design spaces to enhance movement, to encourage movement. This is an example here of the headquarters of Lending Tree in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they have actually a staircase that's very much like this HSIB amphitheater. If you look around here, those of you who are in the auditorium, you can see the staircases, which invite people to climb them instead of taking the elevator. We can have many different kinds of movement in these spaces. And again, it doesn't have to be that you're going to the gym. What we found in the GSA study, in the Well Built for Wellbeing study that we did when I came to the University of Arizona, is that the difference in these spaces that are designed for movement can be 1,000 steps a day. So if you design the space right, your office can be your new gym without even trying. We talked about relationships. Relationships are so important for reducing stress, for enhancing well-being, positive relationships. And you can design the built environment to encourage places to get together, places for socializing, large and small groups. Office spaces now have many different kinds of gathering spaces that encourage these kinds of relationships. That's probably the single biggest reason to go back into the office. You know, there's a big question on the minds of all office building owners now. Why, and all organizations, why do we need these buildings if people can work from home? Well, the reason is we are social animals, and it makes a difference to be physically present in the same space with other people so that you can develop relationships, positive relationships, team building, and so on. Spirituality. You can certainly design spaces to enhance spirituality. And what you see on the right-hand side is a rendering for the new Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine building complex. There's going to be 3 buildings. If you came up Mountain and Maple, you pass the construction site on Maple just down the road a piece here. That's going to be the new Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. And we have a spirit building where we're going to move the currently meditation chapel that is in the old cancer center. We're going to move it into this spirit building. It'll be a place for people to come and contemplate and be quiet and see these beautiful Arcosanti Paolo Soleri bells that will be hanging in that building. We're also going to have spaces where you can program for spiritual activities like Tai Chi and yoga. Again, I'm inviting everybody to come when the buildings are open. And this is going to be part of the age-friendly university, that we want the community to enjoy these amenities that we will have. But you can certainly design a space to encourage programming and spiritual practice. What about nutrition? Nutrition is so important. You know, again, in healthy diet is extremely important. If you're living in a underserved area and you're in a food desert where you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, the good news is that there are a lot of city farms that are springing up, either based at schools, or in this case, this is the Tucson Village Farm, which is just up the road off of Campbell and Roger. And there they have thousands of kids, K through 12 kids and their families come through, thousands and thousands, to plant the seeds, to grow the vegetables, to harvest the vegetables, to learn how to cook the vegetables well, and to take them home to eat a healthy diet with lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. And again, at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, we'll have a space in that multi-purpose building, we call it the Body Building, where Dr. Andrew Weil will be able to give cooking lessons, cooking demonstrations, to show you how to cook healthy, fresh food. And finally, sleep. Sleep engages all of these 7 domains. As Rocky said, it's not just one thing. We know that circadian light is extremely important. That is bright sunlight, bright morning sunlight, full spectrum sunlight from 8 a.m. to 12 noon is very important to set your clock in your brain. Everybody has a clock in their brain that is set and that helps you sleep at night. If you're exposed to this bright morning sunlight, lowering stress in the ways we talked about, increasing movement is all important for healthy sleep and good quality sleep that helps you heal. So I'm going to now turn back to the issue that's front and center on our minds still, and that's COVID and viral infection. So Rocky, how can we use these integrative health interventions to protect ourselves from viral infection?
Well, when I look at this image, basically, I see this enormous, overwhelming COVID particle. that it feels like it's rolling right toward me. And yet you see this individual with a bell jar over them. And that bell jar, the way I'm looking at this image, is their immune system. That is a huge level of defense. And so doing that, when I talked about the definition of integrative health, I talked about the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. And I really want to make the point that those aren't three separate things. And they're not just interrelated, they're interdependent. So if you have a problem going on in your body, it's going to affect your mind and your spirit. If you have a problem going on in your spirit, it's going to affect your mind and your body. If you have a problem going on in your mind, it's going to affect your spirit and your body. These can't be changed. They're and the way that I learned this originally is that these are silos. You know, we talked about these things very differently. They're not. And these 7 core areas that we talked about, all of those bring about positive changes in body, mind, and spirit, and our sense of well-being. And what they end up doing is actually improving both our resilience and strengthening our immune system, which makes us less likely to become infected. And should we have an illness, it helps us to better recover from that illness. So Esther, when you see this image, how do you view it, particularly in the context of the built environment potentially helping people be more resilient in the face of COVID?
Well, certainly the built environment plays a huge role. And yes, I see that glass bubble as part of the built environment around you, the environment that you can manage to help protect you from viral infection. But of course, resilience is key. So I think during the pandemic, we all became ventilation experts, right? Everybody knows the difference between a MERV 8 and MERV 13 filters. Yes, no. Why were we all sitting outside when it was freezing? Why do we have the garage doors? I don't know if you noticed, the garage doors are open here. It's in order to ventilate the space. I can tell you that this space is extremely well ventilated because I tested it with our carbon dioxide monitors. Now, when you breathe out, you breathe out carbon dioxide and sort of moisture, which carries viruses with it. So carbon dioxide that you breathe out can be a surrogate measure for whether there's a risk for viral infection. And that's actually being used a lot now to measure different buildings and whether the ventilation is up to scratch. So there are 3 things that determine whether you will be, whether you'll get sick from a virus. One is the dose to which you're exposed. The other is the duration of exposure, so how long you're exposed to those viruses. And the third is resilience. Now, ventilation, opening the garage doors, having frequent fresh air turnover with high power ventilation, filtering with these MERV 13 filters or with filters coated with viral killing agents, which is now something that's being tested in many, many centers. But so that can reduce the viral load in the air that you breathe, right? It's blowing away. Distancing, masking also reduces the viral load of the person next to you. But if you're not resilient, you will still get sick. Now, it doesn't mean that it's your fault. There's a lot of genes that determine how sick you get and whether you'll get sick. But these things that you can do to enhance your resilience are really important to protect you to the extent possible from getting sick once you're exposed. And you can design the built environment, as I've talked about, to enhance resilience in many ways. And again, this is an example of the Lending Tree's headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina, that actually opened during the pandemic. And nonetheless, because it was so beautiful and because people wanted to be in this beautiful, calming, restful space with plants and beautiful views and places to gather, they had, I think, about 70% occupancy even during the pandemic. So you can design spaces to enhance resilience as well as to enhance physical health by improving the ventilation. So what can people do if they want to engage in integrative health, Rocky? You've developed with the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine an app to help people do that. Can you help walk people through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So mywellnesscoach.arizona.edu is where you can find the app. It's a free download. It's available in English and Spanish, actually. It's built on some of the principles of our integrative health and lifestyle program, but also on our integrative health and well-being coaching program, and that it uses motivational interviewing techniques and presents this materials in a way that helps people begin to make changes around this. So a question I'll ask you is, over the last 2.5 years, how many of you wish that there were times that you could have eaten a little better, a little more healthy? A few hands there. What about the wishing that your sleep was better? And what more hands there? What about that you could do something to make yourself and improve your resilience in this? All right. What about the desire to be more connected in nature and in your environment? There seems to be a pattern here. But what about wishing that your movement habits were a little more helpful than what they are? What about having more time to spend in relationships, healthy relationships, not toxic relationships, but healthy relationships? And then what about the ability really to connect in a way that might enhance our spirituality? Yeah. So there's a lot of hands. So where on earth and how do you start? And so the purpose of the app is to help with that. So the idea here is you'll see these 7 areas, and what the app does at the beginning is it helps walk individuals through each of these areas and to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. How do I feel like I'm doing in this particular area? Not how does someone else think I'm doing? Not how does someone, have they told me how I'm supposed to be doing, but how do I feel I'm doing? And so you get this, which may help you decide, well, this may be an area that I want to work on. But if you look at the center of this image, see the heart with the key and the connection of these things to your values. Why is your health important to you? So the app helps walk through that. How does your health tie to your sense of mission and purpose, your values, your aspirations? Because by connecting your desires to improve things that might have a positive impact on your health to that sense of purpose, your likelihood of being successful in making things that are transformational increases. So, the difference in change and transformation, if you take water and you freeze it, it becomes a solid. If you take water and heat it, to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it becomes a gas. Very different things, but that's completely dependent on external things. If you take a caterpillar who goes through this period of darkness in a cocoon or a chrysalis, they emerge something completely different on the other side. That butterfly can never go back to being a caterpillar again. So we want to talk about transformation, and this connection to that meaning and purpose does that. So basically the app then takes you through the ability to learn more about each of these areas, to explore things that you can do to improve that, and then to set goals. Start SMART goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And not only does it help you set the goals, but then helps you to go into basically how do you then take these goals and turn them into healthy habits. So it helps you to monitor that and gives you reminders. So Esther, how do you have some take-home messages for how people can take their work and home environments to help them better support their resilience and their movement toward well-being?
Well, if you work in one of those office spaces that I showed at the beginning, the high wall cubicles, dark, musty, and you don't work in a space like this or what the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine building is going to look like, you can certainly advocate for your organization to design for health and well-being. There is a huge movement now across the country, around the world. There is a demand for healthy well-being buildings. And it's called the Great Resignation. People are resigning and voting with their feet if they're not put front and center in terms of comfort and occupant experience in their workspaces. But if you can't get your organization to change, and if you can't leave your organization, there are things that you can do. And this applies to home workspaces as well. So many of us are now working from home, and at least part of the time. Excuse me. So speaking of dry air, one of the things that you can do is humidify the air. I didn't talk about this, but we did find that the stress response is higher when the humidity is less than 30% relative humidity, sorry. I like to illustrate my talks. So you can certainly put a local humidifier at your desk space or in the area where you sleep. You can put a fan in to get the air to move. You can have a standing desk or remind yourself to get up and move frequently. If you don't have access to sunlight, you can use these full spectrum sunlight boxes that give you that full spectrum sunlight in the morning, and you can create spaces for quiet meditation and contemplation. But it's important to go inside yourself, just like Rocky mentioned. And when I came back from Greece, I asked myself, what was it that would help me to get back into that meditative space? And one of the things was the scent of the citrus on the night air. So I put a jasmine plant on my deck in Washington, D.C., and I was able to sit in the evenings and smell this wonderful fragrance. So there are many resources that you can turn to, and this is a paper that our lead architect at the College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture, who is leading the Health and the Built Environment program, Dr. Althoff Engineer, and I wrote together with Rocky Crocker and Victoria Mazes, Andy Weil, and others at the center. And this outlines in detail a lot of what we've been talking about. You can read my book, Healing Spaces, which explores a lot of this and also tells stories of the people who were doing these kinds of studies over the decades. And then this is the new rendering of the new Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine that will incorporate all of these features that I've talked about in its design to enhance physical health and emotional well-being. So I think with that, we will turn to questions from the audience. And please, there are microphones. You can raise your hand because we have a lot of people online. We're going to be needing for you to speak into the microphone. Oh, Anissa, you have some questions online?
I do have one. For sleep specifically, any tips on how to shift from going to bed late and getting up late to going to bed earlier and getting up earlier?
Well, do you want to take that or?
You
Okay.
Go ahead.
So it's kind of like if you're jet lagged. And just think about it if you're jet lagged. So what I do is I make sure the very first thing I do in the morning is go outside and get a dose of sunlight. I eat breakfast outside every single day, even when it's cold. I'm from Montreal, so I don't mind the cold. But yeah, that's for me, the most effective thing. And also the other thing is not be exposed to that bright sunlight afternoon. As the day wanes, You need to then follow the cycles of the sun. And don't be looking at your blue screen on your computer and your your laptop, and too much blue light at night is going to be as awakening as a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and I think people in Arizona don't experience this to the extent that other parts of the world do. But that hour that we change times, people feel horrible, just that one little hour different for weeks after that. So I think in making this shift to being up earlier and going to bed earlier, all these things help. Exercise helps with that as well, improve the quality of sleep. But also just think about doing this in baby steps. It's not overnight. I'm going to shave 2 hours off of this and put these 2 hours here, but just be patient with yourself and let this happen somewhat organically, although intentionally.
So actually, I'm going to suggest something of that. There are a number of your wearable devices have really good quality sleep quality reports back to you, and it will tell you you ate too late, you had coffee too late, you should have started winding down earlier. It will tell you what you should do. You may not want to listen, but it will tell you, it will help you to be your health coach to get you to sleep earlier. I see that there's a question in the back there.
Yeah, I'm trying to grasp this resilience concept. Is that a neologism for natural immunity?
No,
I'm not being political. I'm
no.
just wondering,
Yeah, resilience. So resilience is how quickly you bounce back from whatever insult, whether it's physical or emotional. So think of a rubber band. If the rubber band is fresh and new, you stretch it and it bounces back. That's what your stress response does. That's what your immune system does when you're healthy. When the rubber band is played out, you stretch it and it sort of stays limp, right? So resilience is the ability to bounce back to that healthy baseline. Whether you're talking about your stress response, your emotions, your immune system, whatever part of health, there's many parts of health.
So you're going to get the damage anyway. I mean, you're going to go through the cycle anyway, and resilience is just to come back to some close to nominal.
Right. Okay. So you have to go through the cycle. If we didn't have a stress response, we'd all be dead. It is not possible to have a living being without a stress response. People have tried to make genetic fruit flies or mice without a stress response. It doesn't work. The reason is you need your stress response to give you that focused attention, that vigilance, that ability, that energy to fight or flee. You need that stress response. The stress response turns on when you need it and shuts down when you don't need it. The problem occurs if that stress response goes on too long. When you don't need it, that's when you get sick. That's when all those stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, impair the immune system's ability to do its job. But you certainly need to have that ability to respond to whatever the insult is and then bounce back. A colleague of mine, Julian Thayer, professor of psychology, studied special forces. And those special forces, whether it's genetic or whether it's trained or whether it's both, they can turn on that stress response really high when they need it to do their job, to focus, and then they shut it off right away. Unlike most of us, where it kind of stays going on and on and on, and that's when we get sick.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that for me is that beginning to recognize each of our individual patterns in that, so that when you feel yourself moving into that point of not being so resilient, of thinking about, okay, when this happened before, what were the things I did to help myself become back in balance and heal? And so for me, I mentioned the first burnout. I didn't learn much from the first burnout. With the second burnout, I learned some stuff. once I begin to put together that there are things I can do that will actually help me to downregulate my self-response by taking better care of myself. So that's part of it. And it's all about balance. You know, we can't, you don't get through life without scars and bruises and dealing with stuff. It doesn't happen that way. But learning how we can better deal with those things and better protect ourselves through all of these 7 areas that we talked about and the environment that we're in, those are the things that begin to help us to walk a bit in more balance with that.
And I would say that in terms of my experience in Greece, it's not that I magically healed. I suddenly realized that if I kept eating these French fries and cheeseburgers every day for lunch and had a sedentary lifestyle and was burning the candle at both ends when I got back, that I would continue to get sick. And sometimes we need a real wake-up call. Yeah. And that's what we both had to get us to change our lifestyle. And it's not that I'm so great at it. I mean, I still do overdo it. But then I remember how sick I was and I say, okay, now's the time to pull back. And I swim every day. And, you know, I if I can't swim, I walk. And so there are many things that you can do to maintain that resilience. But one thing I want to say that's really important is if you can't do it on your own, it's not your fault. Do not feel guilty if you can't get yourself well. First of all, when I was studying those rats, the rats that got arthritis had 20 different genes on 15 different chromosomes that predisposed them to getting arthritis. They were going to get arthritis, okay? The ones that were resistant had 2 genes that made them resistant to arthritis. So you're dealt a deck of genes that you have to deal with. And you know, Andy Weil's books, Optimal Health. The goal is, and this is also with aging, the goal is to be optimally healthy to the extent that you can be. But if you can't do it on your own, seek professional guidance, like an integrative health coach, like an integrative healthcare professional, like the app, to help you. You know, Olympic athletes, they have trainers, and trainers in this kind of lifestyle are very important. There's some.
I'm very interested in what you just said because I was diagnosed a few years ago with severe osteoporosis. And unfortunately, I listened to a rheumatologist who gave me 1 injection of Prolia. And I had a terrible response. It affected my jaw. And I refused to, go back on. He said, well, I don't know, whatever. And I found physical therapists to work with me. And I have a hand therapist, and then I have, she's an occupational, and then I have a regular one for everything else. However, I'm at this place where every time I get a DEXA, it's horrible. And my GP is freaking out because he's an internist. He's wonderful, but he just thinks I'm kind of playing with fire here.
Well, so one of the main points of, I'm glad you raised that, but one main point of integrative health, the reason we call it integrative, the reason that Dr. Andrew Weil coined the term integrative health is because it's integrated with conventional state-of-the-art medicine. That's why we got away from the complementary and alternative medicine. We're not saying throw all that out. There are great drugs, there are great surgeries, there are great things that advances in medicine. This whole building is the Health Science Innovation Building. There's amazing stuff being discovered. We couldn't have gotten over COVID without the vaccines that were created in record time, the antibody tests, the PCR tests, the Paxlovid now. There's a huge amount of science that has gone into helping people be well. We're saying add on to it all of these kinds of integrative practices. And I'm glad you brought up physical therapy and occupational therapy. That's part of integrative health is physical health, like acupuncture and physical therapy and massage therapy and so on. I think there was a question behind you, the lady in pink.
While the mic's passing too, I think the other piece of this to me is that an integrative practitioner, the way we train people, yeah, we have all this evidence on things that may help, but that has to be individualized. That for each person, based on not just what's going on in their body, but their goals, beliefs, and values, and how they want to proceed. I had a cardiologist who told me, as a physician, don't ever forget that the patient is the one that has the disease. They're the one that's suffering. You need to figure out what they need, not what you want for them. And so that philosophy, I think, also shapes that interaction a lot. So thanks.
Thank you. Following up on what this one was saying, if you want to try to find an integrative medicine doctor, can you get help through this wellness center or the app to find somebody that's specific to what you need?
Yeah, so the app doesn't have practitioners listed, but our website for the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine has a find an integrative practitioner feature there that you can enter city, zip code, state, and look for certain specialties or for people that are integratively trained general practitioners. It also has integrative health coaches listed there, but that's the way that you can, through our website here at the Center for Integrative Medicine, actually locate practitioners and know a bit about what their background is. So,
and for those of you in the room, there are materials that you can pick up that give you, and you can see for those of you online, the website and for more information. So I think Anissa has some people online. Speaking of online,
We have a lot of questions, actually. So I don't think we're going to get to everyone, but
wow, we're over time.
we are way over time. If everyone could bear with us for a couple of minutes, maybe we'll take a couple more questions. Okay, so is there any correlation between specific food groups and stress? So I think this is maybe.
There's certainly in people that are experiencing a lot of stress, not necessarily food group, but we know that caffeine, when you're mixing that in, when you already have raging stress hormones in your body, can cause people to have palpitations and insomnia. And so foods that are overly stimulating to people, those are good to, at the very least, have them in moderation. And if you're going to have them early in the day, as opposed to throughout the day. I think that basically, again, and we have some stuff online. There's actually a course on the anti-inflammatory diet through our website, but of really learning just in general how to make the diet more healthy. That in and of itself is going to help with resilience and ultimately stress levels.
One more question. How can we make these spaces in our homes?
So yes, you can certainly create well-being spaces in your homes, and this is a big issue now with so many people working from home. You can, if you only have a tiny corner of your bedroom to work out of, try to separate that. Try to put a screen or put your desk in front of a window so you get the morning sunlight, so you get a view if you have a view out the window. If you don't have a view, then pictures are actually pretty good of your favorite places. You can put plants in your area. Plants can actually, there was a wonderful study done by a graduate student or an undergraduate student at the College of Architecture who tested with Dr. Engineer and Dr. Alethea Ida the ability of certain kinds of plants to absorb carbon dioxide and to clean the air. And plants can actually do that. So if you have plants, but if you have allergies to mold, if you have allergies to plants, be careful. So there's every intervention has an upside and a downside. And again, it speaks to the personalization of these kinds of spaces. Try not to do work on your bed. The bed is for sleeping. You should be designating a space for work so that the work doesn't spill over into the rest of your life. And again, you can do that even with tiny spaces. You saw some of those chairs there that have little side walls. Those kinds of things can help wall you off. Music, nature, being in nature. We have wonderful landscape architects at the College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture. We're doing a study with Dr. Shuzhan Lee and an organization called Nature Sacred, which designs and builds sacred healing gardens all over the United States, especially in underserved areas. If you don't have access to something like a beautiful garden, or here in Tucson, we're so lucky we have Tumamoc Hill. We have so many hiking spaces that we can go out to, walk around your neighborhood, make sure that you get that walk in every day. So there are things that you can do both to design your home environment and get out of it in order to get into these kinds of well-being spaces.
And just very briefly, Esther, you mentioned music. Something I accidentally found out for me personally, because I love music, is the idea of being in a place that's beautiful and calming and healing, and then linking that in my mind. I would have certain songs that were on, and now these songs, they are literally linked in my mind. So I can hear a particular song and it takes me back to that place, and I can just feel the stress begin to come down. So that's something I'll put some intention around, but it's a very easy thing to do that you can do in your home environment or outside or other places. And now I could, regardless where I am, if I hear certain songs, regardless of what's going on around me, it takes me there. And I think that's a really easy thing to do for folks.
And I think just to emphasize what you just said, putting some intention into whatever you do. Think about what it is that will help you feel better, and intentionally incorporate that into your space, into your own individual space. So I think you guys have been wonderful. We're 15 minutes over, and thank you so much for all coming. Thank you, Kathy, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And thanks to those online.